Thank you for joining us. We spoke yesterday with Minneapolis City Council members about their call to disband the Minneapolis Police Department and what's next. We also had a conversation with Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto to talk about how cities can stop police violence and the epidemic of police killing Black people. He promised to cut Pittsburgh policing budgets and consider alternatives, including shifting some first responder responsibilities away from law enforcement. Today, I'm joined by Houston City Council member Letitia Plummer and Texas Criminal Justice Coalition Harris County Attorney Jay Jenkins. We're going to continue to talk about policing. Police kill Black people every week in this country. About half of police killings involve someone living with mental illness or disability. City budgets have come under fire for promising multi-million-dollar increases to police budgets while slashing other services from waste collection to employment programs to healthcare services and schools. The question is, how will we reimagine public safety? What is the path forward? Thank you so much for joining us, Councilmember Plummer. I know this is a very emotional day for the world, and Houston especially, with George Floyd's funeral taking place today. Protests across the nation, including in Houston, have shocked elected officials everywhere into action and allowed leaders who have long called for fundamental changes to step up. You have called for changes in the past and just yesterday proposed reallocating as much as $11.4 million from 199 vacant police positions to mostly other causes. Thank you so much for doing that. Why is this an important step for you?
So first, John, thank you so much for allowing me to be with you all today. As you said, this is clearly an emotional day, but it really strengthens why this conversation is important. As a lot of, we're asking for a lot, people are asking for a lot of changes to happen. And in Houston, we've presented some amendments in our budget for the budget process for tomorrow. I still feel like it's just a start. This is important. Primarily a huge drive for me because I'm the single mother of 3 Black boys. And so my youngest son was detained, my oldest son actually was 14 years old when he was detained by the West University Police Department because he looked like someone that was breaking into homes in the area. So I've been having this conversation with my sons for now 15 years. He's 20 years old now. So it's crucial. And I feel like this is an opportunity for the nation and the world really that's watching. And I feel like this is an opportunity for us to take a stand. This door is going to open it's not going to stay open forever. And this budget process is crucial because I believe that programs that don't have money attached to them are the ones that fail.
Thank you for sharing your experience with your sons. I can definitely relate. My family can relate to that. Can you talk a little bit about what specifically the amendments would do? Like what kind of shift we're looking at?
Yeah, sure. So let me first make sure we clarify. A lot of people are kind of mincing my words and saying that I'm defunding the police department. I'm not defunding the police department. The police department currently has 199 vacant civilian positions. And I want to make sure we're very clear on that. There's civilian positions. We're not taking police off the street. We're not impeding the possibility of them getting more cadet classes and things of that sort. So all I want to do is reallocate money that has been sitting, basically within the budget that totals $11.7 million and reallocating those dollars to be spent the proper way to where we can support communities and create more transparency. And so there are a number of issues that we're focusing on, but I want to focus on the top 3 that I'm really going to fight hard for tomorrow. And that is an independent oversight board. I want to make sure we fund that. And we've got allocated about $1 to $2 million to allocate to support that. The reason why it needs dollars attached is because we want to create a portal that will allow citizens to make complaints and concerns. And of course, we'll make sure they're validated and make sure they take an oath, so to speak, when they make their complaints. We want to make sure that our citizens understand that transparency is key. And that independent oversight board will be, the people on that board will be selected through a jury type selection process so that it's fair and equitable. And that's going to cost money to implement, and they need to have some subpoena powers. So that's going to cost some funding to be placed within that in that program. That's number 1. Number 2, we need to make sure the training is in place. And that training, we're using the guidelines of the 8 Can't Wait, which a lot of people are talking about, that use of force. Excuse me. the use of force policies, and those policies need to have some training attached to them, and that's obviously going to be incorporated in that as de-escalation training, diversity training, making sure that police officers understand the need to respect different communities and how different communities function and thrive. The third piece of it is Cahoots, which is a program that is nationally based. It is a program that allows cadets, which are licensed officers, Houston police officers, to handle nonviolent crimes, those petty crimes, and a lot of those crimes deal with our homeless people that are suffering with mental health concerns, and so we want to make sure that is funded, and that's going to help the police. That's going to help allow certain police officers to have additional mental health assistance and training to make sure that they help people that are struggling with that, so it doesn't turn or flip into a violent crime. Because the police don't have time, or because they have weapons, or because they don't have the proper training to de-escalate that particular situation. Those are the top three. Of course, I want to look at money into a reentry program that Houston currently is doing. It's for people that have been incarcerated before, but it also it supports them from not having to be double offenders. And that's really crucial. And then we got to dig deep and look at the roots. This starts with Black and brown boys, right? And that's typically where we need to start. So having some support to My Brother's Keeper program, which is getting a lot of national attention, looking at how do we, inject monies and resources to those programs so they can continue to thrive. So those are the top ones. I mean, obviously we've got a couple things on our list, but if we dwindle this thing down, which I feel like is still not enough, this is just the beginning. And so, I'm listening to people, I'm trying to make compromises, but those particular programs I just mentioned will total about $6 million. And I feel like that is a drop in a bucket to what we need to do at a minimum as the almost third largest city in the nation.
Thank you for giving us more explanation about some of the things you're calling for. We're hearing increasing calls from folks in the community to not only give $0 to law enforcement, but to actually decrease the money that's going into systems that have never really served communities of color. Like when you talk to people, they say, we don't even call the police anymore because if they show up, they could kill me, right? Like if something's happening in my house, I don't trust law enforcement to handle these responsibilities. Thank you for mentioning the Cahoots program and just some of the allocations. So I want to press you. So some of the funding looks like it will go back to the police, including, like you said, I think you said $3 million in de-escalation training. We've seen this in other cities, and it hasn't resulted in the transformative change we want to see. So I want to push you. Would you commit instead to increasing the funding for the emergency first responder program you advocate for, like you said, based on Cahoots, by $3 million instead of pushing for more money to law enforcement?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And you're exactly right. I mean, the research shows that training really doesn't have as much of as an influence on the way in which police officers think. So you're dead on. I'm connecting this training, though, directly correlating to the use of force procedures. So this training is going to support making sure that we're able to implement and hold accountable the use of force. And this is a lot of things, this is the tricky part about this conversation. When I changed legislation with the state of Texas and I was dealing with adoption rights, one thing in legislation I learned that sometimes we've got to get ourselves in the door. We have to make sure the funding is placed in there to where we can improve the programs. I'm with you 100%. This is not even remotely enough. But I believe if we have an oversight board in place that is not dictated or guided by anyone, including the mayor, and this is independent people that are deeply rooted within communities, and they hold these training processes. We help choose the processes that are effective, and we make sure that these eight uses of force procedures are ordinances and policies put in place. I believe there is a partnership there. Are we giving money directly back to the police departments? I'm not sure if we're really doing that, as long as it's governed by the oversight board, and that our unions and our police departments will agree to the 8, because we do show that if those 8 use of force policies are put in place, we do see 72% of brutalities and deaths decrease. So there is a direct data correlation with enforcing that and putting that in place.
Thank you for sharing that too. We've heard increasing calls, even with those 8 policies, ideas about really transforming these systems, right, and thinking about how we can just bring more community into this process and fund what communities know will help them, right? So what about $3 million to alternative programs like building mixed income flood resistant housing for people, or people who are experiencing housing stability or houselessness? Aren't there better ways to spend this money and help our residents and people that really are struggling, especially in this age of COVID, where it's crises on top of crises on, right? There's so much, right? Why is this a good use of our money?
Right.
Sorry, your money. Sorry.
Yeah. These are great questions. And let me give a little bit of a backdrop, if that's okay with you, of where we are. The mayor is not supportive to my amendment at all. The mayor doesn't want to reallocate any funds. I mean, we are fighting against a brick wall here. And so you're right. I mean, there are so many ways. I mean, just 3 weeks ago, I was fighting for tenant support, to making sure that money got to tenants, because we knew that would affect Black and brown communities, and they'll put them on the street and increase our rate of homelessness. I mean, I'm with you on this fight. I promise you. I'm worried that we're not going to get the money at all. I'm worried that there's going to be some kind of way where tomorrow, when this vote happens, that we're not even going to support the allotment of it. And so the things that you're talking about right now are going to be a continual fight. I'm going to watch block grants. I'm going to look at how we allocate money to these larger nonprofit organizations that really don't teach people how to fish, that just take the monies out of our communities and make us dependent on those communities. This is an ongoing fight. This doesn't end tomorrow. And so you're right. I'm going to watch how we spend. I'm going to vote down situations to where we don't have the support that we need. I just believe that this may be our first step. And I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm listening to people. I'm just so worried that I'm going to get in there tomorrow and I'm not going to have any support on the horseshoe, and that my 11.7 is going to drop down to 2 and maybe 0.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to get our foot wedged in the door.
Yeah. No, and I think it's really helpful for our viewers too to understand the political dynamics and the best ways for us to push. You mentioned the mayor. I'd also like to bring in what's often been another challenge to elected officials like yourself, to mayors, and it's this idea of the role of police unions, right? So frequently, police unions are preventing officer accountability and fostering secrecy around policing. There's a common understanding that it's police unions that are often preventing leaders from making transformative change and really thinking about how to change the culture of these departments and practices, right? So if you could explain like how police unions impacted your ability to protect and serve your communities, if you want to touch that.
Yes, of course. And I personally am pleasantly surprised. Believe it or not, I got more transparent information from the police union than HPD. It's been really interesting. It's and maybe it's because we're in Texas. I'm not sure what the deal is. And maybe it's because our chief is selected by the mayor. It's not an elected position. We have a very strong mayoral form of government. We are not allowed to put items on agendas. I want to make sure our listeners are listening to that, because the way that our governance is done here in Houston is very different from a lot of other places. We don't have the level of control. And so, believe it or not, our police union is supportive. They've given me a lot of data. They actually were the ones who we talked about the oversight board and having conversations of how that would look and how that could be equitable. They want these body cam videos to be released. It's public. I mean, they have publicly asked for Chief Acevedo to release the body cam footage. They are willing to have the conversations about our 8 counts of force. And they're the ones who gave me or are helping me find out and reading into the training manuals what they're actually being trained on and what they're being trained against, and kind of checking those boxes with those 8 counts. So, and now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. Could we use more and get more and push a bit harder? Absolutely. But I want to say that they've actually been a part of this conversation. and they have been helpful. They're not sending me redacted documents. You know what I'm saying? And so, and in here with our union here and my relationships with the unions here, they love cahoots. You know what I'm saying? They think that it would take a little bit of pressure off their police departments. You know what I'm saying? And so, in my experience, I'm speaking personally, in my one-on-one conversations with her, it seems like they're at least at the table. It seems like they're at least willing to have the conversations. Now we're going to see how this whole thing pans out tomorrow. We'll see who steps out to support. We'll see the ongoing conversations as we're reviewing their contracts, because they're having conversations about renewal of their contracts as well. It's showtime, right? And showtime in a way that it show me what everyone's willing to do. And the conversation does not end tomorrow. It just begins.
Absolutely. So it is showtime. And Jay, I'd like to bring you into this conversation too, so we could have a broad perspective of just like what's happening here. Do you agree with that? Like what's been your assessment of how, police unions operated in this space, especially in relationship to, like the police chief and the police department in Houston?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I would say that my experience with police unions is a little different from Council Member Plummer's. So in my experience, the police unions have really been, in addition to protecting officers from accountability and keeping stuff secret, in addition to that, police unions have been an effective voice against broader criminal justice reforms in Houston in a way that makes it real difficult to get some of this stuff done. I think, and on top of fighting against the reforms as they're proposed, and I'll use bail reform as an example, even when we win, where we won on bail reform, the police officers union is still devoting a considerable amount of time and effort to rolling that reform back. And they're very powerful and strategic in the way they sort of use their political influence and their influence in the media. And in my experience, at least, they've been making things a lot more difficult for us to push through.
Thank you for that perspective. So, we're thinking not only about police unions, but, you mentioned the opposition to bail reform. And it's my understanding that also, Police Chief Art Acevedo opposed those reforms. And, so I'd like to ask some follow-up questions about that, right? Like, what are we really dealing with here? We have people that are, putting George Floyd on their Twitter handles, and they're all about change, I guess. But to me, if you're opposing reforms that are both going to reduce the stain of mass incarceration and have fewer interaction with law enforcement, then you're not a real proponent of change. So I'd like you to talk about like what's really happening here. What's going on here? To put it in Texas terms, is Chief Acevedo, and I'm not from Texas, so if I butcher this, like please let me know. All hat and no cattle. Did I get that right?
I'm not from Texas either, but I believe you got it right. So I can say on our end, I think if you talk to folks in the community, they want accountability. And we've had, in the last days, HPD has killed 6 different folks, and we're still waiting for those videos to be released. And the demands from the community are pretty simple. I mean, we can't be accountable unless we have those videos. And accountability is not going on sort of Wolf Blitzer to talk about a police killing in Minneapolis when you have 6 of these killings in your own jurisdiction that taxpayers are asking about. And I think a lot of us, even before Chief Acevedo came to Houston and Austin, we heard he had sort of a similar reputation of he's very good with media relations. He's very good at sort of building relationships with the community, but when push came to shove, he was not in support of the reforms, like you said, that would shrink the system and result in all these positive benefits.
Thanks. I'd like to get back to discussing how we're going to really change these models. So, and I'd like to bring in some polling from the Justice Collaborative Institute with Data for Progress, which suggests 9 in 10 voters support creating an agency of non-law enforcement based emergency responders that would shift most first responder responsibilities away from traditional law enforcement agencies. And I think this is really important because the COOTS models from around the country or in the pilots that we've seen involve a medic and a social worker, not cadets or law enforcement. This is a feature that is supposed to be shifting away from law enforcement. And so, council member, I'd like you to explain why the model that you were describing, and correct me if I'm wrong with that model, like why this model would involve law enforcement as opposed to, shifting and focusing on community-based organizations, healthcare providers, et cetera.
No, 100%. So the only reason I prepared that model in that way is because I wanted to use the new cadet classes that were coming up. So we were approved 4 additional cadet classes. All of this is money. It's all about dollars, right? We know we got that funded. For me to now pull another group of social workers and that's a whole nother bucket of salaries I have to find. And so what I was thinking in my mind is if we could transfer some of those cadet classes to COOTS, to members of the COOTS program, then maybe I don't have to look for additional money. But you're exactly right. As the program gets better, as we find more dollars and grant dollars to support the program, then absolutely, I would love to move it away from law enforcement and move it to social work, because that program works and we see that has been very effective. So right now, the reason why I'm bringing it up right now is, like I said, it's just because we have been approved. We were able to reallocate money with the CARES dollars, and so we're able to get 4 additional cadet classes. And so I figured since we have those already embedded in the budget, then maybe we could use, one of those classes or 2 of those classes to be HPD officers, but also kind of double as CAHOOTS officers as well.
Over time, I know you keep saying that this is the first step. Over time, what's your vision? I mean, we can back up a little bit and talk about how to get more dollars now, because I think we can get the advocate community is exactly looking for more dollars for community, right? And I know there's a political reality there. What's your vision for how much of the burden will they, because I think we asked officers to do too much, quite frankly. What burden can the new response corps take from Houston Police, like over time? Like what's your vision for that?
Oh my gosh. I mean, just the fact that, and once again, this is data we have not been able to retrieve from HPD. We asked them to send us, how many calls are nonviolent calls and how many are violent. They sent us a website that went nowhere. And so once we're able to break that data down, I'm making an assumption here. I don't have the data to support it, but I could say that at least upwards of 20% of the calls are nonviolent calls. So if we can pull those away and have someone that's got, more skill set with mental health support, and have that social worker a part of the conversation, maybe even blend our Ethan program, which is our telemedicine program, to where there's a mental health worker on the other side of that tablet. There's so many ways that we can maybe redefine and restructure the way the program is. I believe it's going to remove some of the stress off of the police department and make it easier for them.
What's your timeline? So if we have the current budget, I know you mentioned things are happening in real time.
Yes.
Today, for example, what's your timeline for getting, for pushing on all these, the mayor, the police chief,
tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Okay,
so tomorrow. Okay, so starting tomorrow.
It starts tomorrow. And this is why I want to be very clear about, there was a letter that was submitted by some of the council members supporting basically all of my amendments are all listed there. My signature is not on that letter. And the reason why it's not there is because one, it was good to see that they were supporting. My whole amendment was basically in that letter. But one thing I know, John, more than anything else, is that you can talk about programs, you can talk about pushing things to committees, we can talk about task force. I think Jay could probably chime in on this. If there is no dollars associated with programs end up lying on a shelf and no one has a conversation about them. So our timeline is less than 24 hours. Go time is at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we need some money allotted to these programs to start the conversation.
Absolutely. Jay, how do we get these dollars? And specifically, can you explain what the institutional resistance is to this? Because it seems like, a no-brainer to be shifting these resources and getting them into programs that actually work. Can you explain, from your perspective, what's happening with, the mayor and why there's not broad support for really like having like transformational change as opposed to kind of incremental reforms?
Yeah, and I want to go back to something that Council Member Plummer mentioned in that the climate at City Council is hostile to reforms of the police department in a way that, honestly, it's easier for us to advocate at the county than it is at the city level in a lot of ways on criminal justice, and that is not normally the case. And I think there would be, unfortunately, there might be institutional support for this idea, but when push comes to shove and we're talking about sort of switching out police for these responders, that's where people get a little gun shy. Our mayor has, he came in having done some pretty good things in the legislature on criminal justice. But criminal justice has just not been on his radar. And, another difficulty in having this fight is the position of the mayor, unless it's changed, has been we're adding police, right? And at a moment like this, to still be maintaining that we need to add police and not only just that we need to add police, but that the conversation is not worth having is just disconnected from reality. And I don't know if that goes back to sort of the old Texas reliance on law enforcement to solve a lot of problems or not, but in a lot of ways when these problems come up, the mayor and city council in the past, I will say that we are encouraged with the new city council and have the newly elected members and have high hopes to work with them on some of these reforms. But until we can convince the mayor that, using this police hammer to solve all of our problems doesn't work, we're going to still have some tough sledding.
Absolutely, that makes sense. I'd like to transition to another issue. So in the middle of the night on March 13th, Louisville, Kentucky police executed what's called a no-knock warrant and entered Breonna Taylor's apartment. Breonna was a licensed EMT who worked for 2 local hospitals. They fired shots and hit Breonna at least 8 times. The police killed her. Police found nothing illegal in her home. In fact, the person they were searching for was already in custody. The tactics they used, a battering ram, the element of surprise, are used by police departments all over the country with often disastrous results. Just a few years before, a little girl named Aiyana Jones was killed in the same way. Now, the Louisville City Council president is calling for 3 measures in response to the killing of Ms. Taylor. One of those is banning no-knock raids. After similar botched raids in Houston and mounting public pressure, the police were forced to discontinue no-knock raid practices. How has the first several months of new tactics gone, and what more needs to be done to demilitarize police, council member?
Yeah, got it.
Sorry.
Yeah, the chief did go in and say that he was not supportive. Wanted to eliminate the no-knock raids. We're still dealing with the body cam footage. We're still waiting to get that body cam footage that happened on Hardin. So honestly, right now, I think it's a little bit too early. Maybe Jay can chime in a little bit more on where he feels that is. But right now, I feel like it's too early. And until we can get the footage, until we can actually get the camera footage to start and see what's going on, they haven't released that yet. And so a lot of people pushed him, trying to pushing him. Even the unions actually came out publicly and said that they want to see the footage. And then we need to continue to have that conversation. I think it may be a little bit too early to tell in terms of how successful we are in terms of that. But it seems to be the agreement with the police department currently.
Jay, do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I think Councilmember Plummer is correct in that I haven't seen any numbers since those changes have been made. I would say that On the community end, I think the community was hoping that the conversation would be about a little bit more than whether or not we can do no-knock raids, every once in a while, and really start to get into the discussion as to, what purpose the police were serving, that night when they kicked that door down and killed those two innocent folks. And does that increase, our sense of public safety? From the people that I talked to in the community, the community is not feeling that sense of public safety. And again, now we've got 6 more officer killings in the past 50 days. And again, a steadfast refusal to release that footage so that we can have some sort of community accountability for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing the same from community. And I mean, that relates to a second measure that we've also seen, which is to only allow quick knock warrants when police are investigating a crime involving serious physical harm, like murder or rape, and there's evidence that there's imminent threat of danger in the house. Do you all support limiting military style raids in that way?
I do. I definitely do. I really wanted to include some of that in our amendments, but it just got to be so much that we just didn't list it. But this would be, if I could just get the oversight board in place, I think these are things that we can bring through committee in terms of recommendations, and then the oversight board can hopefully put some pressure and create some ordinances that will prevent that from happening.
Can we also talk about preventing acts of violence and threat of bodily harm to protesters? Because every day we're seeing protesters out, and we've seen video after video of police using supposedly non-lethal force, but we've seen this use of force blind and maim protesters and journalists. Will you commit to banning rubber bullet and tear gas riot control tactics to protect peaceful demonstrators from abuse?
Yes, I would support all of that. I mean, the list is so long. It has got to be an ongoing conversation, and the community is telling us what they want, and we just have to get it done. That's why the letter that those members wrote down about 90 days. We don't have 90 days. We don't have 90 days to have more conversations, and we don't have time to go to committee and have it sit in committee for 12 months, 2 years. The time is right now. We've got to start this process. We've got to implement some actual true legislation and some ordinances that protect people.
Totally.
And this is just the beginning. It's almost embarrassing that we have to offer this much, and I'm begging for, a possible $4 or $5 million. I mean, this is ridiculous. So I'm almost embarrassed to even continue to have these conversations. Like, I don't understand this is a no-brainer. I mean, people are upheaving, other police departments in so many other cities and states. And so, this is the initial conversation. And Jay, I would love to keep you in this loop. Seriously, I know we've never met before, but I am so grateful for the work that you do. We need to put pressure on people, and we need to see things happen. And one thing I'm realizing as I get older, I'm turning 50 this month. So one thing I realize as it gets older is that things do take time, but there are moments of urgency, and this is a moment of urgency. And so there's no time to be patient. Let's get it done. Let's stop talking about it. If you were at the march, if you are sitting in a camera shot with George Floyd's family, if you have posted one thing about George Floyd in your social media or your Twitter, if you have sent up a prayer, said a prayer, taken a moment, then there is no reason. Or if you said you've listening to communities, then there's no reason this vote doesn't happen tomorrow.
Absolutely. Jay, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I applaud the council members' urgency on this. This is the first time, I think, where we felt as, in the community that there is some sort of commitment to having this conversation. I cannot exaggerate how hostile the reception was prior to, all this unrest dealing with George Floyd, when we would come and talk about police accountability. So, we've got a long way to go, but we've just got to keep pushing and take advantage of the moment, as council member said.
Absolutely. Sorry, can you guys see me?
Yep.
Awesome. Sorry. No, thank you both. So I know there's a lot happening in Houston today. I know you have votes and testimony and all of it. So I really appreciate you coming on. I just wanted, I saw a sign in a protest and it said, teachers shouldn't be forced to buy their own supplies for students while police departments are purchasing more combat vehicles. And I thought that was just a very clear reminder of like what we're dealing with, especially in this moment. So we have an opportunity for transformative change. We have an opportunity to invest in care and opportunity. And I appreciate both of you helping us think through next steps. I know we need to wrap up, but I appreciate both of you for this conversation. And thank you for joining us, and please join us again soon as we explore ways in which people are reimagining public safety in America. Thank you.
Thank you.